Greetings and hello. There are people on this call from almost every time zone. My name is Bill Kenny, and I'd like to welcome you to our webinar, Tired of Wasting Time and Money on Trade Shows, 8 Keys to Improving Your Exhibiting ROI. We're going to have a lot of fun in this webinar. We really appreciate you being here. And as I said, there are literally people from every time zone who have signed up for this webinar today. So we're excited that you're involved. Where I am, it's lunchtime. It may be breakfast or dinner or who knows, in the middle of the night for you. Again, we're excited you're with us. We're going to have ideally lots of questions answered during this session. I'm going to, in a moment here, switch from being on screen to showing some slides. Once we get through the presentation, I'll come back on screen and we'll go through whatever questions you have. So if you're not familiar with this interface, you should have the ability to activate a group chat box, probably on your right-hand side. That the switch to do that, or the toggle to do that, is probably on your left or right. Excuse me. But feel free, as I'm using the slides, to enter additional questions. We do have a bunch of questions that were submitted that we'll show and certainly go through as well. But feel free, as I'm in the slides, to share any additional questions. I won't see those until I come out of the slides, but understand we'll certainly take care of those for you. So let me switch over to my slideshow here, and just take me a second. And all right, So the slides should now be live for you, and you'll see the tired of wasting time and money on trade shows slide up. And so again, we're excited that you're with us. We're going to get through a lot of material in this session, and you'll see at the end that we're not going to leave you hanging. There's actually a bunch of follow-on material that we're going to be supplying, and certainly we want to help you be very, very successful in your trade show endeavors. So there's just a ton of money being wasted on trade shows. So, and this can come from a whole bunch of different reasons. We're actually going to go through what we see as the 8 key reasons today that money's being wasted. And it's not that it needs to be at all. We're not saying that trade shows are bad. We're just saying that the execution of the exhibitor and the sponsor and the hospitality host and so on is subpar and can improve considerably and completely change the results that organizations are having. That's really the focus here. So I can't give a presentation without somehow showing sailboats. So I'm a passionate, avid sailor, and actually did quite a bit of racing as a youth. And one of the most recognized and really inspiring and successful sailboat racers ever is a gentleman named Paul Elstrom. He's from Denmark. He was and remains one of the most decorated Olympians ever. And so in any event, Paul is one of the sayings he had was the races are won before the start. 90% of winning races happens before the start. And so it was really amazing to see that. And we see the exact same thing with trade shows. In fact, we see that 90% of success in trade shows happens by the work that's done before the trade show happens. Oh, I'm hearing that slides are not moving on the screen. So let me stop sharing, and I'm going to go back in here and see if I can't get this so that you're seeing the slides. I apologize. Sometimes the technology is our friend and sometimes it isn't. So let's see if we can get this working right for you. So I'm going to go in and do this a different way. Let's try it this way. One more time here. Let's try this. And See if this will work. So hopefully I'll get some feedback here in a second, just in case my slides aren't showing. So I apologize, but uh, again, here's the home slide, and then we're advancing on to, you should now see a second slide, which was money being torn up. And this is where I talked about the idea that a lot of money is being wasted. And then again, the obligatory sailboat slide. Again, the key is um, that success in trade shows, a lot of it is developed before the trade show happens. In fact, we feel that a vast majority, somewhere upwards of 90%. So the questions we got were fantastic, and so I just wanted to show that we have a whole bunch of questions that you all submitted. We will definitely get to these. You'll see some of the answers woven into the slides that we have here, and then certainly we'll add to them at the end, and certainly answer additional questions as well. So um, our agenda really simply is to talk a little bit about the trade show value proposition. We'll talk about those 8 common challenges that we've mentioned and various solutions. We'll talk about sort of the process to diving deeper, and we've got a whole methodology for that in terms of additional content we're going to be providing. And then again, we'll get to your questions. So lots of good stuff. Let's buckle up here. So you may want to know just a little bit about me and a little bit about us, just so you have context. So I'm the founder and CEO of Meet. We help companies, particularly growth companies, exhibit at trade shows, and quite often those companies are going to new markets. And a lot of our work is in the business to business space. So I've been in the event world for about 30 years, everything from being an exhibitor, which I'm in multiple events a year. Over those 30 years as an exhibitor, I also ran some trade shows for a while. And then with Meet, we've been around for about 5 years now. And again, our focus is really about taking the existing events that are in the marketplace and helping companies leverage those. There are literally tens, if not hundreds of thousands of events that are available in the marketplace that can be well leveraged. And so there are lots of great ways to do that, and we certainly love to help. So let's hop into our content here. So why trade shows? And we want to make sure that, maybe the disclaimer up front here is that, we're all going to be coming into this information with various experiences and various biases and so on. And so we're going to share kind of what we've learned and what we've experienced and what we've seen, and now with sort of multiple perspectives, having run trade shows, exhibited in them, and also now helping people exhibit effectively. We kind of have seen this from all angles, and so here's the thought about why trade shows. So when you think of all the different modes of marketing that there are, there the most of them, thinking about it, the business to business space, which is really where we spend all of our time. Pretty much all marketing dollars are spent towards getting face to face with a prospect. And the really cool thing about trade shows is that the trade show itself gets you in front of prospects. The issue is, and we'll go through, there are a bunch of issues that keep us from sort of leveraging that. And in other words, finding our prospects at the shows. That's really a different problem. The prospects are there if we choose the right shows. The issue is, how do we identify and activate them? And so that's really the key. But the trade shows get us to that audience. The issue is, how do we leverage that? So let's talk about a couple of different points here with regard to purposes. So the individual trade show, and there are probably, we're going to talk about sort of multiple purposes at a trade show, but we want to have one singular sort of primary purpose that we're developing our strategy around. So we're going to suggest that the key purpose for most companies and most trade shows, the key purpose is to identify and connect to volumes of quality prospects. And And it's really important that we actually spend just a moment and define what we mean by a prospect, because we find this, and you'll see I'll slow down every once in a while and define terms, because prospect is something that we find that many companies, many individuals in marketing tend to expand the concept of a prospect. And a prospect is a very narrow set of the marketplace, because they have to have three key qualities. And if they don't have all three of these qualities, then they aren't a prospect. They may be a prospect in the future, but they're not a prospect today. And in order to be a prospect, and you can say this along with me at home, because some of you know these, some of you might remember them from any type of marketing training or whatnot, but or even sales training. So number one, a prospect has to have a need, and it has to be a bona fide need. You can't project a need onto a prospect. They have to realize a need. They have to have money. They have to have the resource to satisfy that need, to solve it. And then finally, and sometimes the most urgent, or the most critical, is urgent. They need to be urgent for a solution. In other words, they can have any one or any two of these, but if they don't have all three of these qualities, then they're not a prospect. And we say that for a few reasons. The primary reason is because we want to develop, when number one, we need to identify that prospect, who that person is that we're targeting at this particular event or overall, and then align and build all of our strategy and materials and calls to action to that prospect. And that congruity is really important. So now that we've talked about sort of the purpose of an individual trade show and what a prospect is, the annual sort of view of trade show strategy, what do we want in terms of what's the purpose of an annual trade show strategy? It's really to create a steady stream of quality prospects through the year, right? You don't want big lulls. You don't want to have big spikes in terms of the leads that come in. There's no point in creating more leads than you can possibly follow up on and nurture and so on. And so there's a balance between sort of wanting to grow and not sort of over investing in creating leads that you can't follow up on. So again, it's really strategy. You may forego some good events because you have better event choices in that time period. It may be that it's sort of a quarterly view, or a semi-annual view or whatnot, or a month by month view. But the idea is that we want to create a steady stream. Really key. So let's hop into the 8 common challenges. And we're going to, what you're going to find with these 8 common challenges is this will really be an annual theme for us in terms of the materials we put out. Will be around, again, diving deeper into addressing these key challenges. And I promise you, if you can address these 8 challenges, you're going to produce, you're going to multiply your trade show results by a factor of 10, 20, 50. The success goes up quite a bit. And certainly that's really what we're all here for. So number one challenge is thinking that everybody is a prospect. We see this all the time. The idea that, many of us have scarcity mentality, right? We don't want to be left out. We don't want to miss anyone. Well, the problem is if you, sort of aren't specific, it's very hard to catch the right prospect. So the issue at trade shows, when you think about it, you get this sea of people there at the trade show, and the real challenge for us as exhibitors or sponsors or hospitality hosts or whatnot, speakers, is that our prospects aren't labeled. So of this whole sea of people that, whether it's 1,000 or 10,000 or even 50 or 100,000 people that are at the trade show, none of them have a sign on the back that says, pick me, right? I'm your prospect. Unfortunately, that sort of device hasn't been created yet. So we need to devise a way that our prospects can self-identify, and that it's easy for them to opt in. right? So we want to focus on a specific and narrow buyer persona. We need to really think about, we think about who our prospect is. Again, they don't need to have need, they need to have money, and they need to have urgency. They need to be so much in trouble or in growth that our sort of our solution is going to be just what they are looking for. So there are lots of ways to build a buyer persona, and I just wanted to show one on the screen here. But some of the things that are going to be important here is, not only to profile the individual and organization that we're going to be targeting, but also to look at what their challenges are, what their needs are, what are their biggest objectives in terms of what they're trying to accomplish? What do they value? That will inform us later in terms of how do we appeal to these individuals. So we're going to come back to this, but this is just an early way to say the first thing before we do anything else, we need to know where we're aiming, right? We need to have the ability to know our destination. So in this case, we're looking for operations managers in distribution and manufacturing and so on. And again, this is just an example. It's not intended to be specific for anyone. Every organization is going to not just have buyer personas, but need to evolve them as their company and as their marketplace matures. So the number two challenge is the idea of once we know who we want to meet, then identifying and selecting trade shows that most efficiently connect us to that audience. And when I say trade shows, I'm using this as sort of a generic term to say events. So trade shows, pretty understandable, trade fairs if you're working internationally, but it also could be local associations or associations with local chapters. I mean, there are lots of events to leverage, and there are different reasons to get involved at different levels. And so ultimately, it's really about sort of making sure that we see the whole field. So what we see organizations doing is sort of taking what we call the lazy Susan approach. And that is, for those that aren't familiar with the lazy Susan, you've seen them. They're the circular devices that essentially serve up, usually they're used around food, but serve up um, product to us. And so as we talk to marketing managers and business executives, what we find is that, and we'll get these emails from new customers periodically where they'll email and they'll say, hey, I just got this email on this particular event. Should we go to it? Or should we exhibit at it? And, looking at any event or any opportunity like this, any marketing opportunity abstractly, it doesn't have a lot of value. Ultimately, you want to put this in context, in optimally a multi-dimensional context where you're able to look at this particular opportunity and how it relates to all the other opportunities that are out there, to get in front of and compel your buyer personas to get into your pipeline. And that's ultimately what you're trying to do. So really be careful about looking at any event opportunity or any marketing opportunity abstractly or as an individual opportunity. It should be looked at in context. So we want to get all the information together and to be able to assess and quantify values of each. We've actually created a methodology where we measure, sort of strengths of each, and now have a numeric way to come up with recommendations about the best events to go to. But the key again is to assess in context. The number three challenge is having misaligned or totally missing call to actions. And what I mean by a call to action is, and some may know it as an offer, but ultimately, what is it that will compel our prospect to stop and opt in? And so for those that are familiar with inbound marketing and sort of generally an online marketing technique, these terms are very familiar. But the idea is really, what offer in the booth will have our prospects stop and essentially seek more information. So when you think of this, the most common thing that we see in trade shows today is, and it may not be an iPad, but it's something like that. iPads are pretty popular. Bigger trade shows will see at least 10 booths giving away an iPad or iPad mini, and maybe more. But let's just think about this logically. If you're, who is giving away an iPad attracting, right? So there are a couple of thoughts here, right? Number one is, um, if you sell iPads, that might be kind of interesting. That's great. Um, but even that, an iPad is not a new device. It's not like you're going to attract early adopters. You're actually probably attracting the bottom half or bottom third of the trade show attendees. If these are people that don't have iPads, they're, they're not really cutting edge. And so, but even much more important than that is it's not really identifying prospects for you. And so it's a really, it's great. It's satisfying because it gives you probably a lot of leads or perceived leads. I'm putting air quotes in here. But ultimately, when, the real challenge we see when we go out and interview sales teams about trade shows is their complete and utter disenfranchisement with trade shows, because the leads that end up getting produced aren't, and again, leads in quotes, aren't quality. And so when they follow up, these are people that have no interest in the company's products or services. And so it's all a waste of time. And this is a lot of the inefficiency that happens in trade shows. So you want to have an offer that's congruent with the person that you want to attract. So just think about fish. I mean, this is a perfect example. So think about, a fish that's sort of indigenous to our area here are flounder, and they're not caught everywhere in the world. They're not, they're not all over the globe. They're probably more a cold water fish. They're certainly just salt water, and they have a fairly unique bait. They like sea worms. So they're not. If we put this lure in the water to try to catch a flounder, they would have no interest in it. They wouldn't go anywhere near it. If we put it in fresh water, we'd never catch a flounder. And so we need to make sure that the bait that we put in the water is key. And in fact, flounder are bottom feeders, and this lure isn't really made to go to the bottom. It's made to be in moving water. And so, the real the real key is once we have that buyer persona, then we need to go through a process to identify an offer that only they will be interested in. And once we know kind of what will stop them in their tracks and have them self-identify, then our offers really served its purpose. And there are all sorts of ways and types of offers that you can develop specific to given buyer personas. So the fourth challenge is having salespeople in the booth, and it's funny because today as we walk through trade shows, we find that probably better than 90% of the booths have the salespeople in them. And the challenge is really, it's a couple fold. First and foremost, the salespeople have a higher and better use. Not to say that the what's happening in the booth isn't valuable. It's exceptionally valuable, but they're not the best people suited to do it. So you really, if you look at, sort of a couple of opportunities, one is, there's certainly going to be, there's prospect identification, which is what the booth is about. That's the purpose of the booth, is strictly prospect identification. Outside of the booth is really, it can be much richer and deeper conversations with people who are already in the pipeline, maybe folks that are at the show that the sales teams are already working with. They already have proposals. Again, they're already in the funnel. Certainly there can be conversations with strategic partners and all sorts of individuals. So let's just do a little quick math. So when we look at a booth, so if we have salespeople in the booth, let's just say a trade show day is 8 hours. If we say a salesperson in a booth, their normal conversation is about 15 minutes, and that's actually pretty generous. It's often longer than that. So that tells us that they can only create 32, we're going to call them marginal contacts per day. And they may get additional cards, but they're going to have conversations with about 32 people. Um, there may be people that drop their cards and so on. That's not what we're counting. Just the ones that the salespeople talk to. Often the salespeople talk to each other, which isn't helpful. Um, and so what we want to do is have the sales team in one-on-one meetings outside of the booth. They should be talking to people, again, strategic opportunities, uh, existing prospects, existing customers. They can be attending the content, making new relationships out in the workshops and so on. But ultimately, they should be out, again, in preset meetings as much as possible. And the booth may identify, one or two or three prospects during the course of the day that can get elevated or should get elevated into the sales process quickly. But by and large, the booth is going to be a totally different operation. So let's just look at what happens in the booth. So what we can do if we take the salespeople out and put what we would call transaction professionals in the booth, again, measuring an 8-hour day, a transaction professional who is merely serving an offer and looking for enrollment, then that person can have their conversations are actually probably a fair amount less than 2 minutes. 1 to 2 minutes is really about right. And so they're going from having, where the salespeople had 32 conversations in a day, a transaction professional can have 240 conversations with qualified contacts, because these are people that have opted in for the offer that only prospects are interested in. So again, imagine you're at a show with 10,000 people, and the the transaction professionals in the booth can actually per day talk to about 240 of those who are qualified, who have opted in. And so your ability to convert um, people who are at the trade show into prospects, qualified prospects, is much better. But again, you've got to have the right bait. The key is really about, number one, identifying that buyer persona, having the right bait, and then putting the right people in the booth where that offer can get served and served and served and served, and people get converted into the lead nurturing process, into the sales pipeline, so that they can get into other forms of the company's marketing and sales process. So with transaction professionals, again, you think about it, that's seven to eight times more contacts that will be created, and they're a lot more qualified because, again, these are people that are opting in. They're not just people who are looking for information, who are going to waste your salespeople's time. These are people that are responding to an offer that's being given. Again, think your offer today is the iPad. The people that's attracting, we're going to question the quality of those. So we want to give them a much higher, a much better quality um, um, offer to opt into and respond to. Challenge number 5. Communication is not localized or audience centered. So localized might mean, where we look at, going to trade shows around the world, localizing it to that specific region. Certainly within countries, there are regional uniqueness as well, the uniquenesses as well. So not only making sure that the language is appropriate for the local audience, and we may be in some region of a country, but it may be an international or national event. We have to take all of those things into context, but making sure that our language, our certainly the materials that we bring, our offers, everything is congruent with our audience. So again, the key is really to communicate. We want to communicate in multiple dimensions, so that we make sure that what we intend to say is what is heard. And again, the more we know about our audience and the persona we're trying to attract, the better we can align that communication with that audience. So again, targeting a unique persona at each just showing another example of a target persona. You're seeing Olivia's story now, and it's talking about her and kind of what her ideal experiences, what her goals are, what her reservations, and so on. What are attributes of somebody in Olivia's uh, world, in her perspective, and so on. So again, there are lots of examples of creating buyer personas. This is just another example of that. But the idea is to use this information to tailor our communication so that we really do connect well with our intended buyer. Challenge number 6 is that the team is not prepared to either execute well or to understand what needs to be done. And so uh, the key is understanding, can they and will they execute the plan? So we want to make sure that we set the team up for success, that everything that they have will help them use this opportunity well, because ultimately trade shows are finite opportunities. Events are finite opportunities. The people that attend a given event on a given day or a given week in 1 year or 1 month will not be the exact same audience that is there at the next time this event happens. So each of these is really quite a perishable opportunity. So we want to take advantage of them while they're there. So we want to make sure our team is oriented, that they're empowered, and that they're able to self-direct. We want to give them the ability to operate independently and successfully, because trade shows move very fast. And again, the idea is how do we set ourselves up for success? 90% of the race is won before we cross the starting line. And so the more we can do to get the value out of the event and to assure value before the day comes, the more we'll be able to do. Okay, 2 more challenges left. The 7th challenge: the full event value is not leveraged, and this is really common, and it's actually really hard to leverage all of the values that are offered by an event, and it's really having a process, a methodology to number one, to understand all the values that are possible, and then number two, to actually have a plan and the ability to execute on those. So there are many components to be leveraged. If you think of an event, and it's actually here we're showing a 3-ring circus. Most events, especially larger trade shows, are like 10-ring circuses. There are so many opportunities. The issue is just really, number one, understanding them, and two, being able to execute. So our general methodology and the way we think of it is to do less better. So that we'd say do less events better is probably the first place to start. So it's really, again, it's about execution. If the idea is to have a strong ROI, then your time, your travel, the event costs themselves, the direct and sort of indirect costs. The best way to leverage those is to execute well. Going to a bunch of events marginally is expensive for sure. So here's just some ideas, and this is not a complete list, but just to give you an idea, there are all sorts of opportunities and this is just sort of looking at a typical trade show. And again, it's not complete, but just to give you some ideas. So the host is going to have pre-event marketing that can be leveraged usually by every exhibitor and sponsor. The company itself, the exhibitor or sponsor, can do and should do their own pre-event marketing as well. You can be a sponsor, you can exhibit, you can speak, you can walk through the event, you can go to the hospitality events, you can get involved in cooperative marketing either with vendors or other partners. You can volunteer or have some of your team volunteer to be a part of the organizing. You can participate in the education. You can have a persona targeted offer. That can be bundled with all sorts of partners and so on. You can invite customers and partners to the event, to the trade show. And you should take advantage of the host post event marketing, and as well you need to do your own post event marketing. So again, this is not complete, but it gives you a sense that, my goodness, there's a lot to this. And so it's really about how do we take advantage of the things that will create the highest leverage for us. And there are a lot of values as an exhibitor for most events that are just so underutilized that, the hosting company, the person or the entity putting on the trade show, sort of adds into the offer of being an exhibitor that often just get left on the shelf. People just don't leverage them. So the key is really how do you just maximize all of those elements. Number eight here. So, and you knew this one was going to be here. So, inadequate follow up and tracking. So, when we look at this, and you come home from a trade show and you got this stack of cards, and you may hand them out to the sales reps, or may handle them all yourself, or whatever the sort of normal process is. All of the contacts that we make at events are perishable. All of these relationships, just like fruits in the grocery store, um, they're all perishable. And if we don't follow up well, and if we don't follow up fairly quickly, then that fruit will rot. It will go bad, and we will lose. Not the opportunity isn't necessarily gone, but the value diminishes. And so you can always dive on the sword and follow up a year later and say, I'm so sorry. But again, if you do it right, you've identified people who are urgent for a solution. And if you don't follow up quickly, and if you don't have that process, then they're going to go find another solution. It's really quite simple. And so we want to make sure that we've got a really strong methodology to nurture, uh, and convert our prospects, and then to track and adjust our strategy. So just sharing a quick diagram here that we use, and certainly happy to dig into this offline with anyone as well. But you know, and these are just sort of some examples in marketing. But this is what we would present as a marketing funnel, not a sales funnel, but a marketing funnel. And so really trying to identify the different types of marketing that are used at various points in the marketing funnel. So when we're just sort of at the awareness stage with, we might even call them suspects, not even prospects, is we're going to people will come to our blog, or they'll come to our website, through SEO or SEM, and they'll respond to various ads we might have, or social media. They also might meet us at an event. Maybe we sponsored or exhibited or spoke or walked through. So that's sort of awareness. But the idea of this diagram really is to look at the different types of marketing at different points in our relationship with a prospect, because we're it's not like certainly in B2B sales, you don't go from awareness to sale typically, right? There are steps of maturity of the relationship. We need to be, the customer or prospect needs to become more intimate with us, and then they need to begin to trust us before they're going to say, I want to buy from you. And so what you really want to look at is, how do we take, sort of utilize the early stage, the top of the funnel tools and modes of marketing to get people to the next level, and then to the next level, and then sort of hand it off to the sales team to actually go through and qualify. But there's probably going to be a few marketing interactions with our prospects before they're ready to go and agree to a meeting. And so we want to kind of make sure that you know the sort of top of the funnel modes lead directly to the middle of the funnel modes, so that they're, in other words, driving traffic to the middle of the funnel, and then the middle of the funnel is driving traffic to the bottom of the funnel. And in each case, those are conversions. We're actually converting people. We're moving them from that awareness to intimacy to trust. And so we want to make sure that, I mean, and the cool thing is these are all measurable, right? We know how many people go to our webinars. We know how many people agree to sales meetings. So we can begin putting metrics and tracking to each of these, and really kind of key. So again, the obligatory sailboat. So when you look at this, the best way to get a head start, and the boat sort of in the middle left of the screen here, I would like that start. He's got a good boat length, pretty much or more on his competition. And the key really is to look at picking, uh, you know, uh, you know, each of these eight sort of challenges. You may have some of them that you feel that you're confident that you're doing well on, but picking sort of the highest priority ones and beginning to improve your ability to uh, s- develop the strategy and execute the strategy to do better at trade shows. And again, a lot of this is going to be the success is going to happen before you get to the trade show floor or before you get to the event. And it's whether it's having preset appointments for the salespeople, whether it's having the follow-up email already queued up and sort of attendee survey or whatever, or webinars scheduled, or whatever those elements are. Having that stuff sort of ready to go and queued up is really key. So we're definitely going to dive deeper, and we're kind of accelerating our schedule a bit to really help as much as we can. So in February, we're actually going to do two webinars, and they're aimed. One is sort of more general and continuing this information. The other one is specifically for organizations that do pavilions. So we're thinking of sort of economic development organizations and so on. So this one that's on the screen now will be on Thursday, February 15th at the same time of day, noon Eastern time, and it's called Pavilion Pitfalls: Moving from Greek Tragedy to Business Recruiting Hero. So again, the idea of this particular content kind of complements what we're talking about now. It's for a subset of the sort of general trade show exhibiting audience, folks that host pavilions, because there's really a multiplier effect when you can execute a pavilion well, because there are really two goals of a pavilion. One is the hosting entity is typically looking to recruit businesses to their region. But then there are all of the companies exhibiting within the pavilion that are looking for generally what any given exhibitor would look like to identify and enroll prospects. And so ultimately, though, if a pavilion isn't well executed, and the pavilion is really a brochure for the region, and if it's well executed, the recruiting is so much better. And so it's quite a bit. There's a sort of a lot more involved in making sure pavilion is successful because of those complications of being able to activate all of the participants, all of the exhibitors, all of the sponsors and supporters, and so on, so that what the attendee sees is a region they want to move to and they want to bring their business to. So, and then the second webinar in February will continue this. So we're going to take each of these 8 challenge areas that we've talked about and attack them individually. So we're going to actually dive deep on the first one we talked about, sort of the notion that everybody is not a prospect, and that and we'll go through the process of identifying your buyer personas. And so that'll be on Tuesday, February 20th at noon Eastern time. Again, the same time slot. We may move the time as we go. We've just found this is a pretty equally inconvenient time for everybody, and so if there's a better time for you, please let us know. We're also recording this, so it can be shared, and if you miss anything or miss any one of them, it will be available. As long as you sign up for the webinar, we'll send you out the link. So this one, again, will be for the entire audience, growth companies and pavilion hosts. But again, really focusing on getting that buyer persona right, because that informs everything else. So now we're going to get to your questions. We've certainly answered some, but we'll answer them directly here. I'm going to come back on screen, and we'll pop through these, and certainly invite you to add more questions. I want to make sure that at least my contact info gets up on the screen for a moment. I will take that off now, and let's get into your questions. So let's see here. Any moment, I will be okay. So, well, good. It's great to be back on screen. And so let's hop into these questions. What I've done, and we had, and in fact, you probably, if you looked in the detail of those questions, we got more questions than that. We actually consolidated. There were, as you can imagine, some questions that were similar to others. So we consolidated some, but I'm actually going to address them in groups. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, looks like groups of questions. So let's I'm just going to read the question first, and then we can talk through it. And I'm going to just put a note in the chat here. Just say hi, and feel free to add any questions or thoughts into the chat as well, and we can certainly address anything else. So the first two questions I'll address together. So the first one is, what's the best way to determine which trade shows to participate in? And then how to get accurate attendee demographics and numbers. Really good question. So first, in terms of determining the right trade shows to participate in, again, we're going to dive deep into this. That'll be in March. But before then, and certainly happy to talk offline for anyone that has urgent needs or questions there. But ultimately, it's about first get the buyer persona right. Who do you want to meet, and who's a prospect, and then identifying what's possible, what events are those people going to, and then coming up with a grading system so that you can properly score those and make the appropriate decisions. And again, we can dive deeper for anyone that would like to. And then how to get accurate attendee demographics and numbers. As if you've done any research in events, you'll know that it's not a very mature industry. There isn't a lot of consistency in terms of how people measure who comes to their events. Some people don't measure at all, and that's and there are actually some good events where we see that. But by and large, organizations will be able to share at least some demographic information with you, and but the challenge is it's not consistent. So you have to come up with ways to normalize the information that you get. So you have a sort of a standard way to look at it. And we've developed some ways, and it somewhat evolves by client and industry in terms of how we look at those. But ultimately, just understand that the information you get from organizations will not be consistent, and it's really up to you to sort of come up with a way to filter and manage that. So the next area has 5 questions. So let me just read these, and again, we'll hop into them. Uh, how best let's see, how best number high quality of these? How to get that? Well, I'm going to add a word in here. How to get the best number of high quality leads? What are good ways to pitch uh, or have questions to engage the attendees? What are clever ideas for leave behinds and marketing collateral? And how to build an audience with a small audience? And then what's the best use of social media in conjunction with the trade show? So this is all kind of around how do we identify and enroll prospects. So really, the best way to number of quality leads, and it's not a numbers game. First, let's get quality, and then let's improve on the volume that we get. But first, just understanding that buyer persona, having an offer that only they're going to be interested in, and then making sure that that offer is clear and available so that they can opt in volume. And excuse me. um, and then the good way to pitch or to engage is really, and again, the purpose of the booth is to simply identify quality prospects. So the offer should be very present, one offer per booth. If it's a bigger booth, you might have two offers, but you really want to make it, think of it like a billboard, right? People are walking by fast. You want to make it so it's easy for them to stop and say, my gosh, I need that. Or I need more information on that. Or how do I learn more about this? And so on. But ultimately, you don't want to dilute your message. You want to make it real easy for them as they're walking by to stop. They saw your billboard, and the rules on billboards. Really simple, high graphics, no more than 7 words. All that stuff sort of applies in terms of how do you message us, keeping it really simple, and get them to stop. But again, you don't want everybody to stop. You just want your prospects to stop. People who have the problem that you solve and that your buyer persona, that target persona, is really concerned about. Start there. What are clever ideas for leave behinds and marketing collateral? I think of promotional products and so on. There are a zillion ideas, and I'm not sure I'm going to be the most creative in that area. I'm going to be pragmatic. Again, this will sound redundant and boring, but if we have the buyer persona and we have an offer that only they're interested in, there really is nothing more compelling than that. Everything else that you introduce to that, you put the pens on the table just to pick a promotional product, and that's certainly going to attract non-prospects, which may be okay, and you may be fine with that. But there, again, if your whole goal at the show is to separate the prospects from everybody else. And let's just say that 1% of the show or a 0.5% of the attendees of the show are prospects. If you put pens, you're going to have, 99%, of the people that stop aren't going to be prospects. And so, the more you can have your messaging and the whole sort of approach be focused on that buyer persona you're trying to attract, the better you're going to do. And that may mean less people will stop at your booth. I'm going to argue that less people is better for sure, because just having names isn't that doesn't sell anything, unfortunately. How to build an audience with a small audience? Actually, sometimes small audiences are the best. You can have, you can get more intimate. You can make sure, even with our math, if we had, an event with a few hundred people, um, we can absolutely get much more intimate. We can make sure that people see the offer, so I think everything works well. Sometimes the large events are the hardest. We may get more contacts, more quality contacts, but we're going to miss a lot. There can be very inefficient, because people will have never come by our booth because of the size of the event. Uh, Using social media in conjunction with the trade show, it really depends on the company. You can certainly leverage it. You should be taking pictures at the show. You should be doing some pre-event marketing on social media, but only if your customers are there. It's not, some companies, it's not as critical to yet as it might be. So if it's a vehicle that your audience is interested in, then certainly beating the drums there, pre, during, and post is critical. So let's move on to the next one. How do we increase the conversations via sales or webinars? How good conversations at the show, or this person has good conversations at the show, but they're unable to get appointments afterwards. And then the third in this section is, how do you really engage better and get ROI out of these events? Yeah, again, it's going to be, all of these are, if you're getting good conversations at the show, that tells me you're having sales conversations in the booth, not the offer and and conversion type conversations that we're talking about. Sales conversations, that's very normal. There are a lot of people, and they don't come to your booth meaning to waste your time. That's not, nobody goes to the show saying, boy, I really can't wait to waste some exhibitors' time today. But the clear fact is that there are a lot of, if we're not specific about what our intent is at the show, who we're trying to attract, then we're going to get a lot of people that don't fit that profile that will stop stop by. And again, not that we mind anyone stopping by, but if we put the right bait out, the right fish will stop by. We put that in the right area of the trade show where our fish hangs out, and we give them the right nourishment. They will bite on the hook. It will happen. So yeah, the more we can align what we want with what we offer and how we execute that, the more we will increase our conversions, the more we'll have appointments afterwards, and the more we'll get good ROI out of the shows. All right, we're picking up steam here. Then this question will be simple. So, how do we decide how many people we should bring to the trade show, and how do we assign them? So again, let's just assume for this trade show that there are two general sort of areas of opportunity. One is the booth itself, and then the other is the sales appointments, or those sort of deeper in the marketing funnel opportunities, or in the sales funnel. So the booth, we should have the transaction people, it depending. This is really sort of a number of days, that number of hours on the show floor each day. There are some of us that can sort of take an 8 or 10 or 12 hour day on a trade show floor. There are some that can't. You may find that you want to have two shifts in a bigger booth. Often that can be what happens. In a smaller booth, you may just have one individual that rotates out periodically. If there are 3 or 4 people in the booth, then one person's sort of walking the floor, getting lunch or going to the restroom or whatever, and there are always 2 or 3 people in the booth. So, I think it's, what size booth do you have? What hours are the expectation on the show floor every day? How many days is it? And then of course separately, how many salespeople you want to bring really depends on how big the show is, what region you're in, or is it a national show or an international show, and so and what who of the sales team would have customers there or could have strategic meetings that would be valuable. Ultimately, the sales process, if they don't have meetings, you might take them there for education, or to buddy with somebody who does have appointments so they learn the process. And maybe the networking events are high leverage for certain individuals and so on. But ultimately, it's really about how do understanding the goals at each of those, for each of those two staff types, and then making sure you build the right number based on the various criteria. And again, happy to talk offline more about this. Is it better to walk the floor or exhibit? Um, well, the challenge with walking the floor, unless you're wearing a sandwich board, and we actually advocate walking the floor at quite a few shows for our clients. We build our strategies. Typically, as we look at the shows, we actually, rate which ones we would suggest walking through versus exhibiting in. And again, we suggest doing less better. So we usually pare down the number of exhibits that our customers want to do so that they can be executed well, and then the rest are walked through and so on. But if you could, the preference would certainly in most cases be to exhibit, because the ability to get people to opt in. And again, we're probably not going to walk around with a sandwich board on, so the idea of somebody opting in is not going to be there. It's only going to be us sort of reaching out to people, and it's only people we can identify. And unfortunately, again, nobody's labeled at a trade show, so we can't walk by them and a little flag pops up and says prospects, here you go. Yeah, that doesn't happen. So let's see, just a couple more here. So how to network effectively and break into already established networks. Yeah, I think first, as I hear that, I think of a scrum of people meeting and you want to jump into the conversation. I think, kind of rule number one is be courteous. If the conversation continues, if you've kind of been patient and waiting, and you maybe made eye contact with the person you want to talk to, one way to do it is simply to pass them your card. Just wait for just even a subtle break. Pass them your card and say, "Hey, I don't want to interrupt, but I'd love to chat with you. Can you text me or just let me know when you're free, or come across the room and find me when you break free? But I'd love to chat with you. It's also a way to value your time and to let them know you're valuing your time. And then, you may find that you can break in and that there's a way to do it. But I would say if you're trying to build a relationship, the first thing to be is be courteous of the other person's time. But it's okay to just break in, hand your card, and say, "Hey, just again, please finish your conversation. I don't want to interrupt, but I'll be milling about. Please come find me or text me, and I'd love to chat with you when you break free." I find that works pretty well, and others may have some additional ideas as well. Um, how do we get speaking opportunities at trade shows? Basic thing is you got to apply. So figure out who in your organization would be good at speaking, what topics they would be good at. The key with speaking, and hopefully you've realized this in the webinar today. And the danger that we see in a lot of people when they speak is that they're self-promoting. And okay, so I've got our logo behind me, right? So that's fine, right? That kind of stuff is real permissible, but this isn't I'm not selling our service during this webinar. So the key thing with webinars or with speaking at trade shows is really about building the perception of expertise. And so to do that, you have to either or both transfer knowledge or skills. And so ultimately, at least what we found the best technique is to do that. Make sure that you're not sort of overly or overtly self-promotional, that you're really focused on the audience's success. And from that, some small subset will say, "Hey, I'm not a DIY person. There's some gaps in what we're doing. We could use some help," and that's where ideally where business comes from. So anyway, we found it works well, and certainly we you lose people very quickly when you self promote and they don't get value. That's really key. So let's see, how do we, the last sort of set of questions here, how to quantify marketing results, and how do trade, or the question. So the first one is how to quantify marketing results. And then the second set of questions is to do trade shows or not is a question. And then what are some metrics to go by for the amount of money they cost? So in other words, what are there some standard numbers to go by? So um, quantifying marketing results, every company is going to be a little bit different in terms of how they quantify results. We certainly see companies as simply as sort of counting the number of cards. Um, you know, that isn't certainly going to give you a sense of ROI. To get ROI, you're going to need to know, what your conversion, how many convert, and at what value, and certainly weigh that against the costs of execution. So both the direct and indirect costs of executing the show. Now, some values you're never going to be able to measure. What are the benefits of getting out and listening to customers? What are the benefits? What we find is good things happen when you leave your front door. So whatever, let's just start there. When you get out and you meet the marketplace, generally good things happen. If you're staying in and you're the mad scientist working, sort of behind the screen as the Wizard of Oz did, then it's a little bit tough. So events and trade shows are a good way to get out into the market to drive that. More on the measuring. So in terms of evaluating whether you should do trade shows or not, again, most of the marketing we do in a B2B sense is to get in front of customers. And so the trade show gets us there. It gets us out into in front of customers and prospects. It just is a nature of what they are. Again, the challenge is they're not labeled. So we need to find a way to allow those people to very easily and quickly opt in. And there are not, again, it's a pretty immature, fragmented industry. So they're not standard numbers. And in fact, the way most trade shows measure is very inconsistent. So trying to come up with sort of standards, again, we've come up with some ways that we normalize that information so that we can help our customers make decisions and evaluate which shows are best. But it does take a little bit of time to sort of figure that all out and be able to do it. But the real key and the reason to do that, besides being able to make some initial decisions, is once you have a methodology, then we actually go and refresh the trade show information once a quarter for our customers. And the idea being that we want to look back and look at the shows and events that we attended and look at the production of those. And that's probably too early to look at production, but we're looking at production continuously of shows and continuing to record that. But then we're looking ahead for another 12 to 18 months, depending on the industry, at what strategies should we be evolving or shifting based on what we're learning. So that once we start measuring, it really informs all of our decisions in the future. And it's actually pretty cool when you go to a trade show the second and third year. Just imagine you're going to, let's say, 5 trade shows a year, and you're going to have, of the 5, you're going to have 2 of them that are in the bottom half, right? So imagine being able to go to the 2 that are in the bottom half and say, hey, we're actually finding other shows that we think might be better for us, but are there some things that you can do to help us improve our production at your show? I'm not sure that our location last year, or at this price, or the size booth we have, or maybe there are some marketing value adds that they can put in that will enhance your production out of the show. Again, it's all about return on investment. So it's, how do you, number one, can you create more production, or can you reduce the investment, or maybe a combination of the two? But ultimately, if you can go and show sort of some hard facts to these people that run the trade shows, it's not 100%, but certainly sometimes, and quite a bit of the time, you can get them. And again, it's not necessarily as much about negotiating down price as it is about negotiating up value. So, and ultimately, often you really don't care, what gets adjusted. It's about, how do we create that value? So hopefully this answered many of your questions. There's a long way to go. We're just sort of skimming the surface. Again, we're going to dive deep into these 8 challenge areas that we've identified and shared. But we so appreciate you being involved today. We are just a couple minutes, and I apologize, a couple minutes after the hour. We lost a minute or 2 there at the start, but we so appreciate it. We will be sending you out today a survey with a link to this webinar recording. The survey simply, how is this information for you? Any feedback you can give us, other topics that you would benefit from, that would be great. And certainly let us know what our follow-up should be. We want to help. We want to serve where we can. We'd love to help you ratchet up your results from trade shows. But if you're a DIY person, let us know that. We've got it covered. That's fine. We want to help people who want to be helped. But your feedback will really help us make sure that we communicate with you well and provide valuable information. So please reach out anytime. It's been a real pleasure, and thank you all. We didn't get any additional questions, so we'll sign off now, and we can certainly deal with any other questions offline. So have an enjoyable day, and talk to you soon. Bye now.